Good afternoon from Melbourne. It's morning in Manila. My name is Bea Cupin, and you are watching Rappler. I'm in Melbourne, like I mentioned, in Australia, to attend the ASEAN Australia Special Summit that starts today. Well, at least several discussions begin today and ends on the 6th. So we're here covering the special summit. Bakit may summit sa Melbourne? Dahil 50 years na since Australia signed up to be an external partner of ASEAN, of course, referring to the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. In fact, Canberra is the first external partner of the Southeast Asian regional bloc. So I am from the Philippines. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. joined several other ASEAN leaders here in Melbourne to attend the summit. Also here, of course, hosting the summit is Australia Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. If you recall, just a few days ago actually, si President Marcos ay pumunta din sa Australia. Bumalik muna siya ng Manila for a couple of days and then flew back here. His first visit was actually to Canberra, the capital of Australia, where he delivered a address before a joint sitting of Australia's Parliament. It was a rare address. There are several stories of Rappler exploring anong implications ng speech na yon at ng visit na yon to Canberra. This is a separate engagement, yung ASEAN Summit, but there is a through line between the two events, and that's what we'll be talking about with you in this live telecast. If it's a little noisy, it's because it's lunchtime here during the summit. So, four things, kumbaga yung, or technically lima, pero apat yung main themes na sa side events ng summit nito. So when we say side events, bukod ito sa mismong leaders retreat, leaders plenaries that are expected to happen on Wednesday. So, five parang tracks. So merong CEO Summit dito, merong Small to Medium Enterprise Summit, meron ding Green Energy, Climate Change na track, Emerging Leaders track. So basically, they gathered young leaders from all over the region, ASEAN and Australia. And also, most relevant perhaps in the Philippines would be the Maritime Cooperation / Blue Economy track. So yung apat na themes nito, so trade, green energy, emerging leaders, so tapping the youth, future leaders of the bloc and of Australia, and maritime cooperation. Parang kumbaga this represents the four major areas of engagement ng Australia with the rest of the bloc. So baka nagtataka kayo, bakit ba malaki yung stake ng Australia sa Southeast Asia? Well, to begin with, many countries, particularly in the global north, are keen on improving yung Indo-Pacific engagements nila. So if you'll recall, si US merong Indo-Pacific strategy, Japan has an Indo-Pacific strategy, Canada has one, Australia has one. So itong engagement with ASEAN, with Southeast Asia, is basically part of that greater strategy to improve its ties with the Indo-Pacific. Bakit? Well, gusto nila, you want to, of course, improve your ties with your neighbors, but also it's a factor of they have no choice. Now, projections see ASEAN growth to be very robust, one of the strongest economies in the world as a bloc, not individually. So of course you would understand that our nearby neighbor Australia would want to tap into that and establish those ties as soon as it can. But there's also another through line here. Ito nga yung maritime security. Si Prime Minister Albanese expounded on this when he welcomed Marcos to Parliament in Canberra. He talked about how the Philippines and Australia are both island nations, both nations that are dependent on trade. So what does this mean? Ibig sabihin nun, it's very important for these nations na the waters surrounding it are safe, are secure, passage through these areas are unimpeded. It's safe for trade, and well, also border related vessels and personnel to ply through these waters. Dahil nga it's a trade nation, so umaasa tayo sa mga pathways ng trade between ASEAN, North America, for instance, Africa and Australia, and the same goes for the Philippines. We want the South China Sea to be, in the words of many like-minded allies, as an open, safe, and secure and stable waterway. Now, when you talk about the South China Sea, for the Philippines especially, yung hot button topic ngayon is the South China Sea, specifically yung West Philippine Sea, which is the term that we used to refer to the area in the South China Sea that is part of our exclusive economic zone, in 200 nautical miles, the area from the border to from the edge of the Philippine border territory to the waters. No, bakit nagiging issue yan ngayon? Well, uh, from several decades now, China has been quite aggressive in asserting itself because China claims practically the entire South China Sea, including areas that are well within the Philippine EEZ. So in the past few year actually, under President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., you have probably, if you listen closely or you are invested in news about the West Philippine Sea, you'd be familiar with what they're calling um, the Transparency Initiative. So that is a push by the National Task Force for the West Philippines to expose China's gray area tactics, or gray zone rather, tactics in the West Philippine Sea. Gray zone tactics refer to yung mga actions that are rather aggressive but stop short of anything military, which would open up a whole different can of worms, a different set of problems for both China and the rest of the region. So why are we talking about that? So yung Philippines ngayon, observers will tell you, reporters who cover foreign affairs will tell you, the Marcos administration has been working really hard to not just turn back or return or restore its ties with its treaty ally, the United States, but also working on improving ties with fellow middle powers. Ang daming mga IR terms ngayon. Pero kumbaga, the Philippines wants to expand its ties not just with a superpower like the US, but also with fellow middle powers, yung countries like Japan, Australia, South Korea, Canada, France, even the Netherlands have also been keen on improving ties with the Philippines, particularly in areas of defense. Um, Australia, for example, kakasign lang noong September 2023, na-elevate yung ties ng Canberra at Manila to a strategic partnership, which is a mouthful and also a vague term, but basically it the way it's going now, it's signaling a push for closer defense ties. When Marcos was in Canberra, nag-sign yung Pilipinas at yung Australia ng isang maritime agreement, the details of which are not yet public. We don't have a copy of that memorandum of understanding, but we'll try to find out eventually. So itong apat na things na to, or apat na parang overlying issues na to na nandito ngayon sa summit. Yung trade as represented by the CEO and the SME summit, green energy, emerging leaders, saka yung maritime cooperation. In a way, again, like I said, represents Australia's major concerns. Now, green energy, in fairness, it's not just an Australian thing. The rest of the world, everyone in the world basically wants to push towards a more renewable forms of energy. Australia in particular aspires to be a superpower in energy. Anong role ng ASEAN dito? Well, tayo yung tinitignan nila na market. Kumbaga, kasi as advanced as Australia is in terms of developing its forms of energy, its renewables industry, it needs scale. It needs a market para mas dumami yung customers nito or marami yung namimili nito. Therefore, also funding the industry para lumago pa ito lalo. And they're eyeing ASEAN, including the developing nations of ASEAN, as a possible partner, in effect, market, in effect, customer for those innovations. Same goes with trade. It wants to up trade with ASEAN. I believe in 2022, trade between ASEAN and Australia was around 187 billion Australian dollars. In contrast, trade between Australia and China was 300 billion Australian dollars. Now, explicit yun na plan ng Australia, gusto nilang palakihin pa yung two-way trade na yun between ASEAN and Canberra. So, more or less, parang yun yung lay of the land kung bakit may summit at ano yung goals ng host na si Australia dito sa summit na to. For Marcos, it's actually an interesting day today. Later at around 6 p.m. Australia time, so that's around a little before 3 p.m. Philippine time, he will be speaking at the Lowry Institute. We expect a foreign policy speech to be delivered during that engagement. Earlier today, he met with the Prime Minister, the newly elected Prime Minister of Cambodia, and then tomorrow he will be meeting with the Prime Minister of New Zealand. Um, Aside from that, he has a Filipino community event, the usual that we expect during President Marcos's visits abroad. So that's more or less what's going to happen here in Melbourne. This visit will be limited to Melbourne. It's a 3-4 day visit for the president and several Philippine officials who have accompanied him. I will be speaking to you again on Wednesday. That'll be March 6 sa conclusion naman nitong summit na ito. We do expect outcome documents from the summit, but we're not quite sure yet on what those will cover. But given the themes, the tracks na inintroduce sa summit, ito, we expect probably ones on trade, the maritime cooperation and the blue economy, um, and potentially one on renewables. So that's all I can tell you for now. Hindi pa officially nagbukas yung summit actually, pero nag-start na yung mga other tracks, specifically on maritime cooperation. Si Secretary Enrique Manalo of the Philippines, our Foreign Secretary, was the keynote speaker of that discussion earlier today. So I'll see you again on Wednesday, March 6th. We'll be posting a story page. Oh, and follow the Rappler. Well, log in. First of all, download the Rappler app, log into the communities page, and then there we can talk about the summit. We can talk about perhaps outcomes that you want or expect. Are you even expecting anything? It was pointed out earlier during a summit na parang ASEAN is really heavy on meetings, to talk about meetings, to talk about another meeting. But the kumbaga concrete action is leaves people wanting. So maybe that's something that you want to talk about as well. In the context of this summit. Also to note, he's leaving Melbourne on the president, Marcos, is leaving Melbourne on the 6th. And then soon after that, he will be traveling to Germany and then the Czech Republic. It's going to be a busy travel-filled March, first half of March for the Philippine president. Again, this has been Bea Cupin. I am at the Melbourne exchange convention center where the summit is happening, talking to you again about the ASEAN Australia Special Summit Day 1. And we'll be giving you updates through the Rappler Communities chat app, specifically in Global Affairs and Security channel, of which I am a part of. And I'll see you there. I'll see you live also in a couple of days. And thank you for watching. This has been Bea. You've been watching Rappler. Bye.